Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink. Back onto my Valentine card series. Today's cards are very Valentine-y. I'm using Simon Says Stamps 2020 Valentine limited edition card kit, which as of the moment of doing this voiceover, the kit is still available. I will have links to everything individually as well. So I'm starting off with this little heart pattern doily stencil. I've placed it into my splat box and I am spraying PIXIE spray over it. And PIXIE spray is a very low tack, repositionable adhesive. Really amazing with stencils. The biggest takeaways with it is you always want to make sure you're working in a ventilated area with anything you might be spraying. And then the other thing is you spray it, you hold it about a foot away from the stencil, you spray it with a good coating, and then you let it sit for about a minute. Again, that'll depend on your environment, but then, you know, it's kind of dried and it's just tacky. So I did all that, and then I've placed it onto my cardstock here. And then I'm applying this Deco foil Metallix aged copper gel that also came in the kit. I've never used the Metallix gels before, so this was full-on experimenting for me. It has a very interesting texture to it. I keep wanting to call it goopy, but it's not. It's one of those things where you kind of just gotta see it in person and play with it in person. It's got a very weird texture to it, but it applies very, very nicely. So I'm just making a grand old mess here. Like I didn't use my Wendy Vecchi station, you know, what I normally use for stencils, because I'm just like, I just sat down and just wanted to play. So I'm applying it with the little palette knife that came in the kit. And then before I finish like putting it on, I'm doing my, you know, this is what I do with all of my embossing paste, glitter paste, etc. now is I clean off the very top edge of the container and then I apply a piece of press and seal. You could use just regular plastic wrap, anything like that. That just helps really seal the jar so that it doesn't dry out as quickly or hopefully prevents it from drying out at all. So I did that. And then this is still wet. You want to make sure you don't let that stencil dry, like in the paste, because then you can may as well say either bye-bye to your project or bye-bye to your stencil. So it was still wet. So I carefully removed it with my reverse tweezers, and then I washed the stencil and my tools and everything. It was good to go. So I'd let this completely dry, and I did a second background as well. And my takeaway from this is it's fun. I like the texture. I like the metallic look. And it has a very flexible, like it's very flexible after it dries, which I also really like because it doesn't dry rigid. Because if it did, something like that large piece with like the blue piece I did first would probably like crack. So it doesn't. It just dries very flexible, like almost rubbery in a sense. It cuts really nicely because I trimmed off both of these pieces and it didn't, you know, crack and flake off like some paste can do that. Usually I don't worry about it even when it does, but I was just observing all my observations as I was like playing with this. So obviously this is all very dry. I did both backgrounds. The second background I used the Tumbling Hearts stencil from Simon's Love You More release. Again, they'll be linked in the supplies. So I've got both these backgrounds with that Metallix paste. And then it was all completely dry. And then I trimmed them with my paper trimmer. And then I'm using a bunch of these pattern papers from the Valentine kit. And when I was actually creating everything, I was all over the place. Like I was jumping in between because I had more ideas coming and just so many things. But I'm going to try and kind of concentrate on each card thanks to the magic of editing. So I had my backgrounds, I had some pattern papers, I had some of the ephemera laid out. And then I also wanted to use this little Cupid image. This is in the Be My Valentine stamp set. It's a solid little Cupid. And I'm inking this one up with, I have some Celestial Copper Delicata ink. I've shown Delicata inks many times over the last few years. I really like their metallic inks. But for me, the way to really just give it an extra punch is to use the metallic, like Delicata inks in conjunction with Perfect Pearl powders from Ranger. So that's what I did. I stamped the image with that ink onto the cardstock, and then I very lightly brushed on some bronze Perfect Pearl powder. I don't rub the brush. I'm just lightly brushing because the ink just, you know, picks up that powder. And because there's resins in Perfect Pearl powder, it just binds with the Delicata ink. That's what I've found. I've never needed to seal it. I've never had to spray it with water, anything. I find it just stays, even after the ink is dry. Like I said, it just seems to kind of bond with it. If you're gonna like really, really rub it really hard, you might, you know, remove some of the powder. People ask me that. I don't know why you would do that after the card is finished. If someone wants to go and attempt to destroy it afterwards, well, that's on you. Just saying. So I've never had a problem. I just brush it on, wipe off the excess, and it was great. So I trimmed out, I just fussy cut out the cupid, and I ended up doing it several times. I'm going to use it on several cards because I just loved how it looked. And I purposely chose that Delicata Celestial Copper ink and then the Bronze Perfect Pearl powder because it was a very close match to this Metallix gel. So it's like everything is coordinating. So I played around and I added a bunch of the ephemera that comes in the kit to create my cards. I had some baker's twine from a previous kit that was in my stash. So I ended up adding baker's twine as well. Just kind of having fun. And even with as much of the ephemera as I used between these cards, I still have tons of it left. These packs have so much in them. So for the background that I used, the Tumbling Heart stencil and that Metallix gel, I used almost all ephemera on this. So I just kind of figured out a random little layout. I popped some up with like foam tape and foam dimensionals. I had sentiments from the ephemera, as well as I stamped sentiments from the Be My Valentine set. I added another Cupid, of course. So then those were the first two cards. Now I want to get into the actual stamp, like really get into the stamp set here. This 6x8 Be My Valentine set. There's two huge rose stamps and two gorgeous leaf stamps in this set that I just love. So I'm going to stamp these onto Nina Classic Crest Solar White 80-pound cardstock with Simon's Intense Black ink. I'm going to stamp these twice because they're brand new stamps and I want to get a good, you know, crisp image. So I have them lined up in my mini MISTI here, stamp them. Once they're stamped, I'm going to color all of these in with Copic markers. So I have been experimenting a bit more lately with just combos that I don't normally reach for, or adding extra colors. So for this one, this is a red combo that I have more recently discovered to be one of my favorites. And this uses a lot more markers than I normally use. Usually I stick it to 3 just to keep it simple. But this combo, it just produces the prettiest red. So I start with my darkest. I work my way from darkest to lightest. Because again, for me, it's just become a habit. It's habit and it's faster. But if you want way more control, or you're newer to Copic coloring, definitely follow kind of the old school techniques of going lightest to darkest. Because you have way more control where you place everything. As always, I don't really follow rules with light sources or anything either. With something like this, I just kind of keep the darker colors to the base of the petals and the area where the extra lines are added. And then I just go from there. So I started with the R89 as my darkest, and then R39. Both of those are kind of like purplish reds in a sense, and they just add a really nice amount of shading. And then I go up to R27, which is what I'm using here, and that's where it starts really looking more red. So R27, and then I go in with R24, which pulls it out a little bit further, lightens it up a little bit more. And then, I'm leaving all of these white areas that I'm going to use my lightest color on. And that's where you get all of that shading from lightest to darkest. So I went in with the R27 and then the R24. And then finally my lightest color is R22. And that's why you just kind of blend everything together. And again, it just creates like the most pretty shade of red. So I colored both of these roses with these Copic markers. And then I'm going to go on to all the greenery. And I went with a more, I guess I wouldn't call it a neutral shades of green, but usually I reach for yellow greens. Again, habit. I like the shades of the yellow greens, like that brighter lime sort of green. But for this, I went a little more classic. Plus, I was matching closer to the greens that are in the pattern papers that come with the kit. So same thing, working from darkest to lightest. And I started with G99. So just adding that in kind of to the veining of the leaves and whatnot. And then I go in with G94, which lightens up all of this a bit, quite considerably. And then I'll go in with G24 and then G43 to completely finish these off. And again, not really following light sources, especially when I have them stamped kind of like this and I'm moving my paper around constantly to, get the best angle just to make it easier to color, as well as stay within camera frame, because that's usually something I struggle with a lot. So I just color, and then I'm just happy with it. I try, that's one thing. If that starts stressing you out, worrying about, you know, shadows and light sources and all that, just ignore it. Just enjoy the coloring and go from there. I have yet to ever give a card to somebody and they're just like, oh, the lighting is all wrong on this card. You know, we just don't notice. Like, it isn't something to stress about. Once you're really comfortable with the coloring, sure. But really, even then, I find it's just easier to ignore it. So I also added highlights with my Jelly Roll 10 white gel pen. This is my favorite white gel pen. Again, just went in, added it where I thought it needed it. And then I fussy cut all of the flowers and leaves out. Didn't take very long. Again, anyone who watches my videos regularly or has known me for a while knows I prefer wafer dyes 99.9% of the time. There isn't coordinating wafer dyes for this set, so I didn't have a choice. But even then, it was quick and simple. I just trimmed them out and I'm good to go. So for this one, I used more of the pattern paper from the kit and arranged some of the leaves and the one rose. And then the sentiments are actually from that little ephemera pack. So I popped one up with some little foam dimensionals and then adhered down another one. So this one came together really quick and easy. And then for the next card, what I ended up doing was taking another piece of the blue cardstock, figuring out where this rose is going to go. And I'm going to use those same leaf images, but this time I'm going to stamp them directly onto the blue cardstock with that Celestial Copper Delicata ink. So I kind of figured out where I wanted everything, have it all lined up here in my mini MISTI. And then I'm going to ink these up again with that ink, stamp them onto this cardstock, and then I'm going to, of course, coat them again with that Perfect Pearl powder. And I've done, like, years ago, when I first started doing this, like I do, you know, the Delicata Golden Glitz with the gold Perfect Pearls, the silver with Perfect Pearl powder just makes it pop. Like, it's just fun. And again, I don't use a ton of pressure with my brush. I'm just very lightly, just basically getting the powder on top of that stamped image, and then it's good. If your ink pad is very, very juicy, like you've just refilled it, you might need to wait a little bit, because if it's really juicy and really wet, it might smear. I've never had that problem, but it can happen. Obviously, like, my little ink cube is very dry. I don't have a refill for this ink. And I couldn't find one on Simon Says site. So I almost wonder if Delicata still makes this one or not. The ink pads are available. I just don't know about the refill. I always say when you get the Delicata inks, always get the refill with them, because you do use them up faster because they're pigment inks. So anywho, after I did the Perfect Pearl powder and brushed off the excess with my big surface sweep brush, I stamped one of the sentiments from the AmyR Valentine set with VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink. I like that ink for sentiments because it's so black and crisp. It's just not compatible with Copic markers. So, stamped the sentiment, and off camera I had stamped the little stem image and colored it with the same Copic markers. Trimmed that, adhered it, popped the rose into place, and then I matted this piece of blue cardstock with one of the pattern papers from the kit, just to, again, kind of give it that little extra something. So then that card front was basically complete. And then for my final card front, I used the Heart Rose Cling stamp that came in the kit. I stamped it onto the Copic cardstock, the Nina Classic Crest 80 pound, with the Simon Intense Black ink, and I used the exact same reds as I used on the other roses to color that in, so I didn't bother filming it because it was the exact same thing. And then I fussy cut that out as well. And then I just grabbed a piece of green cardstock from my stash, because I decided I loved how those leaves looked on the blue cardstock. So I'm doing the exact same thing on this scrap of green cardstock. So just stamping these leaves with that Celestial Copper ink. And then I'm going to brush on that Perfect Pearl powder again. And then on this, because like you stamp them, they just kind of look like whatever. But then you have the powder and it's like, oh, they almost look foiled. Not quite the same, but pretty close. It's just pretty. So brushed it on really lightly, and then I'm going to just dust off the excess with my big surface sweep brush. This works amazing. Another thing I've used in the past is I'll use a little Swiffer cloth, a dry Swiffer cloth. That removes the excess amazingly as well, but I found my big surface sweep brush that I use all the time. This works just as well. So did those. I fussy cut out those leaves as well. And then to assemble this card front, I used more of the pattern papers from the kit, and I just trimmed them down into a, you know, card front size, and then one slightly smaller. And I stamped one of the sentiments from the Be My Valentine set onto that lighter pattern paper, and then again added some more of the little random bits of ephemera. And then I'm going to adhere those leaves into place with the craft tacky adhesive. And then I popped up the rose with a little bit of foam tape, added another one of those little cupids I had stamped and coated with the Perfect Pearl powder. And then all of the cards, I ended up adding sequins from the kit, the MWAH sequins from the kit I adhered, and then envelopes. So in the Simon Says Stamp Hey Bestie release, I went on and on and on about these envelope dies. So I die cut all the remaining bits of cardstock I had in the kit, plus some from my stash, with the base of this A2 envelope die. So all of the bases are cardstock, and then the flap wafer die from the set, I die cut from the remaining pattern papers that were in the kit, because that's what I love about this wafer die, is because the flap is separate. You can either die cut it from the same material, whether it be cardstock or pattern paper, whatever you use to make your envelope, or you can do like this and do it from something different, and it just gives it that extra little something. So they're super easy to assemble. I just folded over the two flaps there, and then the separate little flap has a score line. So you just fold that in, and then you just adhere that straight edge on either side. You can use liquid adhesive like I did here, or you could use something like 1/8 inch score tape would be amazing as well. The only thing with liquid adhesive is you just want to make sure you don't apply too much, because you don't want it oozing out and then you glue your envelope shut. So I got those little tabs in place, and then you just add a little bit of adhesive on the very edge here of the bottom flap, adhere those into place. And then when it comes time to seal my envelope, I'll either use the craft tacky, or again, I'll just use a little bit of score tape, whatever works, and then you're good to go. So I repeated this process 5 times, so each card is going to get its own little matching envelope. So love that. So did all that, and then like I said, I added sequins to all these cards, just adhering them into place with craft tacky glue. And then all of the insides I did finish. I just didn't film it, because again, I had a disaster going on when I was making all of this. I had such a mess. But I'll have pictures on my blog just showing the insides, and I'll show them here too. I finished all the insides with sentiments from the Be My Valentine set, as well as more of the ephemera and some of the pattern papers. So you can see how the cards fit perfectly. I love how these envelopes are slightly bigger all the way around than an A2 card. So if you have little bits kind of hanging off the edges and whatnot, more often than not, they'll fit inside these custom envelopes, which is super nice. And same with if they're a little bit more bulky, they'll fit as well. So like I said, all these cards finished off the insides with stamps and the ephemera from the kit, and then finished off the outsides with either a little bit of baker's twine and some of the sequins that come in the kit. And then, as always, I will have links to the kit, because it is still available at the moment. It will be sold out soon. So I do have links to like the stamp set, the wafer dies, the stencils, all the supplies used, everything. There will be links to all of that in the description box below the video, as well as on my blog. On my blog, it's picture links, so it's kind of easier to see what I'm talking about. So you can check that out below if you are interested. Thank you all so much for watching and subscribing and thumbs upping and commenting. I really appreciate it. I will see you all very soon in the next video. Bye.